And let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house.
In 1963, President John F. Kennedy was boating near his Hyannisport home.
So there's a reported, an alleged sighting that he was sailing off Cape Cod, that an object, silver object, whatever it was, 60 feet across, something like that, came down, and everybody saw the object, and Kennedy basically said, let's not tell anybody about this. Hard to substantiate the story. It's something which you can either believe or disbelieve.
JFK's knowledge on UFOs is hard to gauge. His tragically short term in office left few UFO records in his presidential library.
Kennedy's a great mystery with the UFO topic because there's reason to believe that Kennedy had some real information on UFOs.
He was concerned about avoiding a war.
To regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere.
Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and all this kind of thing.
This will produce the greatest crisis which the world has faced in its history.
Well aware that saucers might cause us to start a war or the Russians to start a war, but I think he would have been very diplomatic about making sure that we didn't go shooting down flying saucers, for example.
Records show that Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's brother and the Attorney General, did share letters from UFO researchers with Congressman Gerald Ford and Air Force officials.
Robert Kennedy was very interested in UFOs. There's a number of letters that have surfaced where he dealt with UFOs. So it's very rare to get somebody in that high in office to actually deal with the subject in writing.
Many UFO researchers believe that political differences may affect access to certain information, and that some U.S. presidents have not been fully briefed about UFOs by the intelligence community. The same researchers suggest JFK may have been the first president to be kept from the whole truth.
He was interested in beating the Russians to the moon, but he wasn't interested in space. It was more of a competition type thing. It was a political thing. Johnson, on the other hand, was extremely interested in space.
Against such force, the combined destructive power of every battle ever fought by man is like a firecracker thrown against the sun.
Lyndon Baines Johnson first served in the White House as President John Kennedy's vice president. In September 1961, he responded to a letter from a UFO researcher regarding extraterrestrial visitation.
Johnson replied to the letter and said to him, rather than going to the Air Force, he told him to go to the executive secretary at NASA. And it was very strange that he go to NASA, not the Air Force, and very strange that the vice president would be answering UFO mail.
During LBJ's term, military officials were said to have investigated an alleged UFO crash near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. The events of Thursday, December 9, 1965 remain an important chapter in the history of UFOs and the White House.
There was a recovery team. NASA was identified as being there. Air Force was identified as being there. The object was moved away, and end of story. They said it was a meteorite. That was the official explanation. What I do in a lot of my presidential research is I take major UFO events. I go to the White House records, and then I start looking at who was there. Where was the president? Where was the Secretary of Defense? So anyway, I went to the Johnson Library, and I started looking at where was the president. He was at the ranch in Austin, Texas. The next morning, all the right people seemed to appear at the ranch. For example, James Webb, the head of NASA, flew into the presidential ranch the next morning. The governor of the state of Pennsylvania was there. All the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they have photographs there of them arrived at the the ranch. Now, the way they describe the meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a Vietnam War meeting. So even though there's nothing that you can actually nail down, the president had got pictures of the craft or whatever you want as proof, it did show some circumstantial evidence that something was happening around the president the morning after the crash.
President Richard Milhouse Nixon's interest in UFOs is harder to calculate.
I've talked to people who claim they talked to Nixon about UFOs. He was very interested. There was a rumored story that he had a huge UFO book collection, which I was never able to substantiate.
Many UFO researchers believe Nixon received specific briefings, information he may have wanted to take public.
There's some very good indications that he planned to reveal data. That UFOs, Past, Present, and Future, a book by Robert Emenegger, a television program that was done with that title. I talked to Emenegger, and he got asked by the Republican Party to produce that show using only government people, because the idea was they were going to release data.
Bob Emenegger was an advertising executive and television producer who happened to know an important man inside the Nixon White House.
Bob Holman was someone I knew from UCLA Beta House, which is a fraternity. Then, as you know, he went on to be chief of staff under Nixon.
In the mid-1970s, Emenegger and his partner researched military stories for their TV production at Norton Air Force Base's film archives.
Paul Shartle is the one who took us in there and said, what would you think if we told you we had a landing at Holloman Air Force Base of an alien craft, and it was filmed by our TDY, our temporary duty guys, and the film was sent here to Norton, where all films usually are sent. And I thought, this sounds outrageous, that, UFOs and all. He said, well, look, if you're interested, check with the Pentagon, but bury those under those other projects because it's a red flag to get into the subject of UFOs. George Weinbrenner was the commander of foreign technology. He has a private bunker down at Wright-Patterson. I went down the long hall, I could see all the little cameras, surveillance cameras, walked right up to his desk and said, I want to ask you, what about the landing of an alien craft at Holloman Air Force Base? And I sort of expected him to say, what? The what? He didn't. So he reached up, pulled out a book, handed it to me. So I opened the book up and it said, to my friend, Colonel George Weinbrenner, signed Dr. Alan Hynek, and the book was all on UFOs. Well, Hynek was the scientific advisor to the Air Force at that time on UFOs.
Perplexed, Emenegger contacted his friend and Nixon's chief of staff, Bob Haldeman.
He was at the White House, and I asked if he had heard anything about the landing at Holloman Air Force Base, and he said, well, I heard something, but I don't know. Whether the president knew, I have no idea.
While Emenegger never obtained the Holloman film for the 1974 nationally broadcast program, his first-hand experience provides researchers insight on what American presidents may have known about UFOs.
A friend of mine helping me out talked to two ex-presidents. They both confirmed that they had been shown the Holloman Air Force Base film.